The desert wind carried a fine mist of sand, whispering against the canvas tents and rattling the steel poles that held them in place. Noon in the Valley of the Kings was a merciless time, heat so sharp it felt like a blade across the skin, light so intense it bleached the horizon to white. But for Layla Hassan, the young archaeologist standing at the edge of the excavation trench, there was no heat, no wind, no world beyond the stone before her. The sarcophagus lay there like a sleeping giant, its carved surface dulled by centuries, yet still bearing the faint shimmer of gold leaf and lapis. The air around it felt heavy, thick with a silence that pressed against the ears. It had been buried under 15 feet of rubble, shielded by layers of limestone and sealed with a resin so strong that even the senior archaeologists had declared it impossible to open without specialized equipment. And yet here she was, alone, with the tools to do it. The order from Dr. Grant, the excavation director, had been explicit: do not touch it. He claimed the interior was too fragile, the risk to preservation too high. But Layla knew the real reason. He wanted the glory for himself. If this was the burial of a royal figure, the discovery would be worth more than the rest of the season's finds combined. Her fingers hovered over the seam of the lid, the metal chisel in her grip cold despite the heat. Her heart pounded, not just from the danger of breaking protocol, but from something else. A strange pull, almost magnetic, urging her to open it. She thought of her father, who had died chasing his own impossible excavation, mocked by his peers for claiming a tomb could still hold something living. She had sworn never to become like him. Yet here she was, standing at the same precipice. She knelt, pressing the chisel to the seam. The first strike was small, just a tap, but it echoed far too loudly, as though the sound traveled into a vast, hollow space. She paused, listening. Nothing. Another tap, harder this time. A faint crack of resin gave way. Her breath caught. She was doing it. Minutes passed. Sweat pooled at her brow, trickled into her eyes. Finally, with one last push, the seal gave a brittle snap. A thin line of darkness appeared along the edge. Layla set down the chisel and placed both hands on the lid. The stone was shockingly cold under her palms. She braced herself, then pushed with every ounce of strength. The lid slid just an inch, and then she heard it. A sound from within. Not the shuffle of settling dust, not the slide of loose fabric. A deliberate sound. Something moved. She froze. Her breath locked in her chest. There it was again, soft, steady, like fingers dragging over cloth. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations. Desert rodents, settled debris, a trick of her imagination. But her heart whispered something else. She stepped back, pulse racing, and glanced toward the tent entrance. No one was there. No witnesses, no one to stop her, no one to believe her. She reached for the lid again, ready to push it further. Her hand trembled over the stone. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Dr. Grant's life. She pushed. The darkness inside yawned open, swallowing the light. The air that escaped was damp, cool, and tinged with something metallic. She peered in. For a heartbeat, She thought she saw a shadow move against the wrappings, and then it moved again. Layla stumbled back, her heel catching on the uneven stones of the trench floor. The chisel clattered from her grip, the sound sharp in the oppressive silence. Her eyes fixed on the narrow slit between lid and coffin, where the movement had come from. Nothing stirred now. The interior was a darkness so complete it felt alive on its own, like a void swallowing every particle of light. Still, her skin prickled with the memory of that slight, deliberate shift. It was not a trick of the eyes. She knew what she saw. A shadow passed across the trench above, breaking the glare of the sun. "Layla!" It was Amir, one of the junior assistants, his voice laced with irritation. "What are you doing down there, Dr. Wall?" "Grant will—" "Shh!" She shot him a look so sharp that his words died in his throat. Her finger lifted to her lips. The silence stretched between them. She leaned closer to the gap. For a moment there was only stillness. Then, faint but undeniable, a soft scraping, like nails against wood. Amir's eyes widened. He'd heard it too. He glanced toward the camp, his voice dropping. We should get someone." "No," she said quickly. Her tone was firm, but inside her chest was a storm. "If we tell Grant, he'll take over. Whatever's in here, this is my discovery." Amir's gaze darted back to the sarcophagus. "Layla, it's been sealed for thousands of years. Nothing could survive that long. Then explain the sound." His mouth opened and closed. No answer ready. She saw it in his face. Fear. Not of her, but of the thing inside. She crouched again, lowering her voice until it was almost a whisper. "Help me slide the lid. Just a little more." He hesitated. Then, with a muttered curse, he jumped down into the trench beside her. Together they gripped the rough edges of the lid, their fingers slipping against the cool stone. With a heave, the gap widened by another inch. And something inside shifted again. It was slower this time, but unmistakable. A shuffling, as if the wrappings themselves were inching toward the light. Layla's mouth went dry. Then came the sound that would anchor itself in her nightmares. A slow, wet inhale. Amir dropped his hands and backed away, shaking his head violently. "No, no, this isn't right. This isn't human." "Don't you dare leave me," she hissed, though her own voice quivered. But Amir was already scrambling out of the trench, muttering prayers under his breath. Now alone again, Layla stayed crouched by the open seam, every instinct in her screaming to run, and yet something stronger held her there. A curiosity she couldn't name, a pull toward whatever ancient thing lay within. Her ears strained for the next sound. Instead, a sudden shadow fell across her. She turned sharply. Standing at the edge of the trench was a man she had never seen before, tall, weathered skin, eyes dark as the tomb itself. His clothes were simple, his face lined like the desert cliffs. "You've opened the breathing tomb," he said, in a voice like stone grinding on stone. "And now you must hear its story."
The man's words hung in the air like a curse, carried on the slow hiss of the wind. Layla rose from her crouch, brushing the grit from her knees, her heart pounding so hard it felt as though the sarcophagus itself could hear it. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The stranger stepped down into the trench without hesitation, his movements sure, as if he had walked this ground long before the excavation tents appeared. "My name is Nabil," he said simply. "I am the son of the last keeper of this valley." Layla narrowed her eyes. "There's no record of a keeper in the Valley of the Kings." He gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course not. We are not written into your books. We are the ones who guard what is too dangerous to be remembered." Her gaze flicked toward the narrow gap in the sarcophagus lid. The shadow inside seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, though she told herself it was just her imagination. "And what exactly is too dangerous about this?" Nabil's expression hardened. "You've opened the breathing tomb. 3,000 years ago, it was sealed by the high priest of Amun himself, not to honor the dead, but to contain something that should never have walked this earth." Layla crossed her arms. "Contain?" "Are you saying there's a person in there? Alive?" "Alive is not the right word," Nabil said, his voice low. "It breathes, it moves, it remembers. But it has not lived in the way you understand for a very long time." Her throat tightened. "What is it?" He glanced toward the camp, where the white canvas tents shimmered in the heat. "In your tongue, it would be called the Bound One. A priestess cursed for betraying her temple, condemned to an eternity between life and death. The air she breathes is stolen, the time she takes is borrowed, and those who open her tomb—" He let the sentence hang, as if speaking the end would invite it closer. Layla felt a chill run through her, despite the sun beating down. "That's a legend," she said, though the words felt hollow. "Legends are only truths that your kind refuses to see," Nabil replied. He crouched by the sarcophagus, running his fingers lightly over the carved symbols. "The seals here are not just to preserve, they are wards. You have broken one." Her mind replayed the moment she heard that first inhale. The sound had been faint, but undeniably real. "Then tell me what happens next," she said. Nabil's gaze lifted to hers, unblinking. "If the bound one's bindings are fully undone, she will wake. And hunger. She does not eat as you do. She consumes memory, breath, and the years of your life until nothing remains but an empty shell." Layla swallowed hard. "And if I seal it again?" "You cannot," he said simply. "Once the first breath is taken, the curse is awake." A gust of wind rattled the tent flaps above. Somewhere in the camp, metal clanged against stone. Layla's skin prickled, not from the sounds, but from the subtle shift she felt beneath her feet, as if the earth itself exhaled. Nabil straightened. It would be wise to leave this place before nightfall. But Layla, feeling that same magnetic pull that had brought her to the tomb in the first place, shook her head. "No. If this is real, I need to see it for myself." Nabil studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, resigned nod. "Then you will see. But you will not like what you find."
And somewhere inside the sarcophagus, as if in answer, came the faintest whisper, like a sigh that had waited 3 millennia to be heard. By the time the sun bled into the jagged horizon, the camp had fallen into an uneasy quiet. Most of the excavation team had retreated to their tents, worn down by the day's relentless heat. Only a few figures moved among the flickering lamplight, shadows stretching long and thin across the sand. Layla stood just outside the storage tent, staring at the dark outline of the sarcophagus within. The camp generator hummed softly, but it didn't mask the other sound, soft, irregular scratching from inside the coffin. It had been going on for hours, sometimes pausing for minutes, only to return like nails testing the walls of their prison. Nabal was beside her, arms folded, eyes fixed on the entrance flap. "The bound one is patient," he murmured. "She will wait until you are closest to act." Layla shot him a look. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Making it sound like some ghost story." His mouth didn't so much as twitch. "You'll know soon enough." From somewhere behind them came the sound of hurried footsteps. Amir appeared, breathless, clutching a half-empty water flask. "It's worse," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. When I walked past just now, the lid, Layla, it's shifted more than before." Layla's chest tightened. She hadn't touched it since earlier. The thought that something inside had moved the heavy stone on its own was impossible. Yet here they were. She pushed past Amir and ducked inside the tent. The air was cooler, heavy with the scent of linen, old wood, and something faintly metallic. The beam of her flashlight swept over the relic crates, the tarps, the scaffolding, and then landed on the sarcophagus. Amir hadn't been lying. The lid sat crooked now, the gap wide enough to fit her hand. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, the cone of light trembling in her grasp. The scratching stopped. She froze, pulse thundering in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to back away, but she couldn't. Her mind was a taut wire between terror and fascination. She leaned over, angling the flashlight into the opening. Something shifted deep within. Not just movement, a deliberate turn, as though the wrapped form inside had rolled toward her. A dry, rasping exhale seeped out, brushing her cheek with cold, stale air. She staggered back, the flashlight clattering to the floor. In the sudden, fractured beam, she thought she saw the linen bindings flex. Not unravel, not tear, flex, as though muscles beneath them had tensed. Nabil's voice came from the entrance. "This is her first escape attempt. She's testing the bindings." Amir shook his head violently. "We have to get rid of it, burn it, bury it, anything." Layla found her voice, though it cracked. "No, we keep it sealed, just until I understand what this is." "You won't understand," Nabil said. "You'll join her." Before she could reply, the sarcophagus emitted a low, almost imperceptible sound, like a hum buried under layers of stone and fabric. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the air, through her bones, and with it came a sudden, crushing sensation in her chest. Her knees buckled as though the oxygen had been stolen from her lungs. Then, just as abruptly, it stopped. The tent was silent again. Layla straightened slowly, her breath ragged. "Tomorrow," she said, forcing the words out. "Tomorrow we open it all the way." Amir looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Nabil only shook his head, murmuring a prayer in a language she didn't understand. Outside, the desert night had fallen completely, swallowing the camp in blackness. Inside the tent, the sarcophagus waited, silent now, but no less alive. The next morning broke without warmth. Even as the sun crept over the limestone cliffs, the camp felt chilled, as if the heat itself had been siphoned away. Layla stepped into the storage tent, her boots crunching on sand that had somehow drifted in overnight. The sarcophagus sat in the center like a predator in wait, its crooked lid a silent invitation. Nabil was already there, kneeling before the stone like a priest before an altar. In his hands he held a small clay jar sealed with a lump of dark wax. The scent that escaped as he cracked it open was sharp, bitter, resin and herbs mixed in proportions that made her eyes water. "What's that?" she asked, her voice low.
"A binding mix," he said without looking at her. "If you insist on opening the tomb, you will need it to keep her from waking fully. It is part of the unsealing ritual. Without it, she will not be bound again." Amir stood near the entrance, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We can pretend none of this happened. Put the lid back, cover it up, leave it to the desert." Layla shook her head. "If we walk away now, Dr. Grant will still find it, and he'll open it without any idea of what's inside. This way, at least we control it." Nabil rose, his dark eyes fixed on her. Control is an illusion in the face of hunger.
Remember that. They began the ritual as the first true heat of the day bled into the tent. Nabil moved around the sarcophagus, muttering in a low, steady voice as he brushed the resin mixture over the carved figures and hieroglyphs. Each word seemed to deepen the shadows inside the tent, though the flap hung open to the sunlight. When he finished, he gestured to Layla. "Your hands must be the ones to break the final seals. You have already opened the first." Her fingers trembled as she gripped the stone edge. She felt Amir's gaze on her, a silent plea to stop. But the pull was too strong now, stronger even than fear. She pressed her palms flat against the lid and pushed. The stone groaned, sliding inch by inch until the full breadth of the coffin lay exposed. The smell that rose up was damp and metallic, with an undertone of something sweet and rotten. And then she saw it. The figure inside was wrapped head to toe in linen, the cloth stained and fraying but still intact. The shape beneath was unmistakably human, and yet wrong. The proportions were off, arms too long, chest too narrow. The head was tilted slightly, as if listening. Layla leaned closer. That was when the chest moved, a slow, deliberate rise and fall. Nabil thrust a hand toward her. "Now the binding." She took the clay jar and sprinkled the resin mixture over the wrappings. The figure twitched, the bindings pulling taut over what might have been muscle. Then, with a sudden, violent jerk, the head turned toward her. A gasp tore from her throat. Beneath the linen, two dark impressions swelled where eyes should be, eyes that fixed on her as if they had known her for centuries. The air around her thickened. Her ears rang. Somewhere, far away, Amir shouted her name, but it was muffled, like sound underwater. Then the chest rose again, faster this time, each breath drawing the air out of the tent. Layla stumbled back, clutching the jar, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nabil stepped forward, chanting louder now, forcing the resin into the folds of the wrappings. Slowly, painfully, the figure's breathing slowed, its head rolling back into place. The pressure in the tent lifted.
Layla's knees threatened to give way. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her hands still shaking. "That," Nabil said, his voice heavy, "was only her greeting." The silence after the ritual was worse than the sounds before it. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in from every side, a waiting quiet, like the breath between lightning and thunder. Layla stood with her back to the tent wall, staring at the sarcophagus. The bound one lay still now, her wrappings unmoving. But the image of that linen-covered head turning toward her replayed again and again in her mind. She'd seen many strange things in excavation work, collapsed tomb chambers, perfectly preserved mummies, even human remains that still held the faintest trace of color in the skin, but never anything that breathed. Amir was pale and trembling, his knuckles white around the pole of the tent flap. "We should leave, now. Forget the research, forget the money, nothing about this is worth—" A sudden thump cut him off. It came from inside the sarcophagus, a deep, solid sound, as though something heavy had struck the stone from within. Layla's pulse kicked hard in her chest, another thump, louder. The wrappings shifted again, this time not just a twitch, but a clear effort to sit up. The chest rose sharply, then fell. The air seemed to tremble. Nabil stepped forward, his voice dropping into a low, rapid chant in the same ancient tongue he had used before. He scattered more of the resin mixture, the bitter scent swelling in the tent. But this time, the reaction was different. The bound one's head jerked violently toward him, her arms shifting beneath the linen as if testing their strength. The sound that followed was a rasp, but deeper, wet, a sound that carried intent. Layla's eyes widened. She's resisting. Nabil didn't look up. The binding weakens every time she is awakened, and you have already given her a taste of the air. The linen over the figure's face bulged outward, as though the mouth beneath was forming words. The sound that emerged was almost human, a ragged syllable, repeated, low and broken. Layla leaned in, straining to catch it. It was her name. The shock rooted her to the ground. How does she know me? Nabil's chant faltered for the first time. His eyes flickered toward Layla with a mixture of pity and alarm. Names have power. If she speaks yours, she can find you wherever you go. The wrappings strained at the seams now, the stone coffin rattling with the effort inside. The cold in the tent deepened, her breath misting in front of her. Layla's instincts screamed at her to run, but the compulsion to see what was beneath those bindings was overwhelming. She stepped closer. The bound one stilled, as if sensing her approach. The cloth over the eyes sank slightly, then bulged again, locking onto her presence, and then, without warning, the coffin's interior erupted. A burst of ancient dust and linen fragments exploded outward, knocking Layla backward into the wall. The jar of resin flew from Nabil's hand, shattering against the stone floor. The tent filled with the dry stench of centuries, coating her tongue and throat. When the air cleared, Layla saw the wrappings unraveling. Not in shreds, but in smooth, deliberate spirals, as if invisible hands were undoing them from within. Through the widening gaps, she caught glimpses of skin, not dried and leathery like the mummified dead, but pale, taut, and impossibly whole. The bound one was waking. Layla's back pressed against the tent wall as the final layers of linen slid away, curling to the coffin floor like dead leaves. The bound one lay revealed, not the brittle, shriveled form she had braced herself for,
but something far worse. Her skin was smooth, stretched tight over long, lean muscles, with a pallor that seemed to drink the light. Her hair, black as obsidian, spilled in tangled waves across her shoulders, streaked with dust and age. Her lips were a muted grey, cracked in the middle as they pulled into something that might have been a smile or a snarl. But it was the eyes that held Layla, wide, unblinking, impossibly dark, with a depth that seemed to move. Looking into them felt like leaning over the mouth of a well, so deep there was no bottom. The bound one inhaled again, the sound slow, deliberate. Layla felt the pull of that breath in her own lungs, as if some invisible thread connected them. Her chest tightened. Amir made a choked sound and stumbled backward toward the tent flap, but the bound one's gaze shifted to him, and he froze as though turned to stone. "She's feeding," Nabil said, grimly. Layla tore her eyes from the figure, long enough to look at him. "Feeding? On what?" "On what keeps you alive. Breath, years, memory. She will take them all, if she chooses." The bound one moved. Slowly, almost lazily, she sat up, her bare feet sliding over the edge of the sarcophagus. Every movement carried a deliberate elegance, like a predator that didn't need to rush. Layla's rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that science could not account for it. But deep inside, a quieter voice whispered something darker. "You've always wanted to witness history alive." Nabil stepped between her and the figure, raising his arms. He began chanting again, louder this time, each syllable echoing unnaturally in the closed space. The bound one's gaze locked on him, and the air between them seemed to shiver. She spoke then, not the ragged syllables from before, but a smooth, liquid language that poured into the room like warm oil. Layla didn't understand the words, but their meaning sank into her bones, an invitation and a warning in one. Nabil faltered, his chant slowed, the bound one's head tilted toward Layla again, her lips shaping a word that needed no translation. "Come!" It was not a request. Layla felt her body move forward without her consent, her boots dragging over the sand, the space between them closed. The bound one's eyes softened, not in kindness, but in possession. Layla realized with dawning horror that the pull she'd felt since first seeing the tomb had not been her own curiosity. It had been hers, the bound one calling her across centuries. Nabil's voice cut through the haze, sharp and desperate. "Layla, choose now, science or survival!" The words struck something deep inside. She stumbled, her foot catching on the corner of a crate. The bound one's eyes flared, the darkness inside them rippling like disturbed water. In that instant, Layla understood. If she stepped any closer, she would never step back again. She turned and ran. The bound one's voice followed her out into the burning daylight, low and certain. "You will return." 3 weeks later, the Valley of the Kings baked under the relentless sun, as it always had, but the camp was gone. The trenches were filled, the storage tents dismantled, the site abandoned as if no human hand had touched it in centuries. Layla sat in a small apartment in Luxor, the hum of the ceiling fan doing little to push back the stifling heat. Her desk was cluttered with unopened mail, half-finished reports, and the small, cracked corner of a photograph she couldn't bring herself to throw away. It was the last picture taken at the dig. Her, Amir, and Nabil standing before the sarcophagus. She couldn't look at it without feeling her chest tighten. She hadn't spoken to Amir since that day. He'd left the very next morning, boarding a bus headed north, muttering about curses and debts that couldn't be paid. Nabil had vanished too, melting back into the desert with the same quiet certainty he had arrived. But the silence was not complete. Sometimes at night she would wake to find the room too cold, her breath clouding in the air. Sometimes she thought she heard the faintest whisper from the darkest corner, her name drawn out like the first syllable of a prayer. The day after leaving the site, she had tried to seal the sarcophagus again. She'd gone back alone, under the cover of dawn. But when she reached the trench, it was empty. No coffin, no tent, no sign it had ever been there at all. The sand was smooth, undisturbed. She knew what that meant. The bound one was not bound anymore. Each day since, Layla had fought the gnawing thought that she had made the wrong choice, not in running, but in leaving her unsealed. Science demanded answers, but survival had demanded distance. And yet the pull remained, subtle and constant, like the gravity of a faraway star. One evening, as the sky deepened into indigo over the Nile, Layla found herself standing at her balcony railing, staring east toward the desert. The air was still. The streets below were empty. In the silence she felt it again, that faint draw in her chest, the whisper at the edge of hearing. You will return. Her grip tightened on the railing until her knuckles whitened. She told herself she would never go back, never set foot in that valley again. But deep down she knew the choice might not be hers to make. Some secrets did not remain buried, and some discoveries did not belong to the living or the dead. Moral. The pursuit of knowledge is noble, but when curiosity blinds us to the dangers of what we awaken, we risk unleashing what cannot be contained. Some doors are closed for a reason, and not all are meant to be opened. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph